Hello, everyone. This is Christian Martin speaking. I'm heading the corporate communications from Bayer. Warm welcome to everyone to our today's call with the title, How Do We Save the Planet? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you join us. This means we are just one day away from a very critical mark that illustrates the boundaries of our planet. The day when we technically reach a point in this year when the demand for nature's resources exceed what our planet can actually reproduce. Today we have invited Saskia Bruysten and Matthias Berninger, who will help us understand what this means for the world as a whole, if there are ways to push this date back, what each of us can do, and certainly what Bayer is doing about it. Saskia has a very international profile. Canadian mother, German father, according to what I read, Saskia, also a Dutch life companion, and currently, most of the time based in Berlin. Today, she joins us from Amsterdam. Saskia is well known as a leader in the social business movement. Almost 10 years ago, she has co-founded Yunus Social Business together with Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus and Sophie Eisenman. The company, called in short YSB, runs philanthropic venture funds that turn donations into investments in sustainable social businesses that provide employment, education, healthcare, clean water, and clean energy to over 9 million people worldwide. Welcome, Saskia, to this call today. Very briefly, also, warm welcome to Matthias Berninger. Matthias is joining us at Bayer since 2019. He has been Senior Vice President for Global Public Affairs, Science and Sustainability at Bayer. He is architect of the company's significantly enhanced global sustainability platform launched last year with a strong leadership commitment. Today, you are joining us from Washington, Matthias, I guess. So I hope you already had the opportunity to grab a big cup of coffee. We already had a quick exchange, and I recognize that you're awake. So welcome also from my side. Before we start the discussion, quick note to everyone who is joining us, especially to the ones who would like to participate in the communications. I cordially invite you to participate in our discussion. Please use the comment function for this purpose. I will see the comments as the moderator and incorporate your questions accordingly. And with that, let's not waste any more time. Let's start the discussion, and my first question goes to Saskia. Saskia, my first question would be, what do you think when you imagine that we apparently have used up all ecological resources for this year as early as tomorrow? What comes to your mind?
Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Christian. And basically, I would say humanity and the planet are really heading towards a disaster because 2020 has, for all of us, obviously been a pretty crazy year. Everyone, I don't know if you also remember that at the beginning of the year, we had forest fires in Australia, we had them in the Amazon, we had this crazy locust plague in East Africa, we've had a heat wave in Europe, we've had like a crazy flooding in Bangladesh, one of the countries that is very dear to my heart. So we're actually seeing a lot of things happening this year, all next to the corona crisis that obviously everyone is very, very aware of. So I would clearly say humanity is to a certain extent heading towards a disaster, and therefore I find the new findings of the Earth Overshoot Day shocking. When I researched the Earth Overshoot Day, I also learned that the last time that the planet was actually sort of in a balance with humanity was around about in the 1970s. So about 50 years ago, Earth Overshoot Day was roughly in December. That is quite shocking for me again, because what that means is that in a short period of only 50 years, we've managed to move from a somewhat sustainable setup between humanity and the planet to a setup where already almost half of the year, we have at half time of the year, we've depleted nature's resources. And of course, this year is a little bit of a different year because now it was August versus July last year. So we've gained about a month, which is great because of a global lockdown, but that is not a lasting effect. That is just a very short-term effect due to a global pandemic, and that's not something that will be repeated in the future. So long story short, I think we're heading towards quite a disaster. If I have to comment in terms of the root causes of this, I actually believe that our economic system is the basis of this root cause. The economic system that we have built, that we've come up with, especially over the last 50 years, has a lot to do with shareholder centricity. It has a lot to do with basically an economy that is built to maximize profits for shareholders. And that has been driven a lot by the US system. By the way, don't get me wrong, I'm a total believer in capitalism. I used to be a management consultant myself. I studied business and economics, so I believe in capitalism. But I believe that the model that we've been going for, which was very focused on shareholder value maximization, has to be changed. And that's the work that we're doing at Yunus Social Business with a concept that we call social business, sort of a type of business that focuses on solving problems rather than creating problems for this world. I'll keep it at that for now, but we can talk more about that in future questions, because I know that Christian probably wants to stop me right here.
No, not at all, Saskia. I would just hand it over to Matthias. Saskia talked, not surprisingly, she talked a lot about the global economic system. Matthias, you representing one of the big global corporates. What is your perspective on first of all my question, what comes to your mind, but also certainly what Saskia said?
Yeah, so thank you, Christian, and it's kind of striking to me. Saskia, you talked about the 1970s being the moment where we started to overuse this planet's resources. And I think in addition to the factor you mentioned, there is one other factor that plays a really important role here that very often kind of gets forgotten. No? In my lifetime, the world population doubled. So the challenge is, how do we, on the one hand, address the changes to the economic system, but on the other hand, get to a place where this soon 8 billion people have conditions in their lives that allows them to live in what I would call like a safe space for humanity. Yeah? So we have this double whammy of, on the one hand, needing to really lift up a lot of people, but on the other hand, reduce the resources we deplete from the planet for it. And when I joined Bayer, for me, what you talked about, the role of the shareholders was probably the biggest concern. Before I joined Bayer, I worked for a family-owned company where the shareholders had a very strong commitment both to social equity as well as to the environment. And I thought, okay, when you move from there to a public company, things will get rough. The encouraging development of the last, I want to say, 2-3 years is that the shareholders and the bondholders expect more from their shareholdings. They expect that we focus on environmental and social challenges. The kind of buzzword is ESG, kind of environment, social, government criteria that need to be adhered to. So I believe there is something happening right now, something that could be used to our advantage in terms of reducing the resources that we need, but also driving more impact and getting to a place where we really get to inclusive growth, i.e. where we take everybody on that journey and not just the few that live a really good life.
Saskia, just to add another aspect to what Matthias said. When we started in Germany our reputation campaign roughly a year ago, not almost a year, This was called voranbringen, which is in English more or less moving ahead things. And our CEO was asked to say what he would like to voranbringen and what he would like to move forward. And what he said is only one sentence. He said, what I would like to move forward is to combine economic success with sustainability, which at the end leads us to the question, how do we combine these two very relevant figures? On the one hand, an economy that also brings a good life to millions of people, and on the other hand, avoids that we exceed our global and planetary boundaries. This is a lot what Matthias and also lots of others at Bayer bother a lot. So what is your perspective on that?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Christian. So for me, with the whole concept of social business, there is only one bottom, or there's basically one bottom line, which is the bottom line of society. So there's a clear focus on solving problems of the society, be it the society itself or the environment. So that's the bottom line there, whereas the economic setup is sort of the condition to get there. So that's what we mean with social business, a company 100% focused on solving a social problem. So I, of course, understand that a corporation like Bayer is not from one day to another going to move from a completely shareholder-centric, profit-driven only model to a model that is only driven by society. So I'm very clear that that's not going to happen overnight. I'm also not a dreamer. But what I do think would be sensible is to go down a path where it is at least a 50-50 use of both the social and environmental topics as well as the financial topics. And what I've read of your work, and Matthias, chapeau that you're already trying to get that now, get sustainability topics also included into management compensation, which I think is a very important topic. But as far as I can read so far, and it's very tough to judge a global corporation from the outside, you know, with just a very few days in preparation. But what I've understood so far is that it's only going to be something like 20% that will actually be dependent on sustainability factors. So I would urge you to say, can we go a step further, especially if you have shareholders that are now willing to actually see that Bayer moves into a more sustainable direction? Can we possibly move to at least saying that 50% of Mr. Baumann's compensation and everyone that's linked to him is actually dependent on the environmental performance of Bayer, as well as the social performance for smallholder farmers, people that are receiving healthcare from Bayer, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I would push and challenge and say, I think we can do a lot more. And then there would be another point, which is, taking away products and services that have a very harmful effect on society and the planet. I don't want to go into the details of all the products because I'm sure you have your facts a lot straighter than I have. But there seem to be products in the portfolio of Bayer that are still harmful, and I wish that we could take those from the market.
Yeah, Saskia, you addressed 2 points. Perhaps let me start with the first one, which is the whole topic of compensation. Now, one thing that I firmly believe in is that you can't make a man believe one thing if he is rewarded for doing the opposite. Yeah, so
fully agree.
And that's how businesses work, and therefore one of the first things we agreed to, and our former chairman of the supervisory board, Werner Wenning, was spearheading this and put all his weight behind this, was to include sustainability aspects in the compensation. And that is to say, not just like tick the box aspects, but really things you can measure. The reduction of your carbon footprint, for example. Whether you reach smallholder farmers and how many you reach, access to contraception in our case, and a broader access to medicine for people who are not blessed with functioning healthcare systems. So we are now in the process of setting this up. And frankly speaking, the quantitative targets in the sustainability space are probably the area where we all collectively need to work much more. So I hear you. In your point of view, 20% is a start and not enough. I'm quite happy that we got to this place and that we are also having auditors who look at that from the outside, so that this is not greenwashing, but actually looked at like financial targets. I generally believe that accountants will be the secret heroes of this transition. Yeah? So that's one thing we are doing, and I know you are doing that as well in your business. Really measuring the impact is key. The second question is a big one, and I think we should go more into the details. Of course, we realize at Bayer that we are very often in the center of controversy with some of our products, and we are open to have that conversation. Yeah, and I know that's one thing that kind of at the moment excludes us from working directly with you. I believe it doesn't need to be that way, and I also believe that there's a lot we do in our portfolio to reduce negative effects. I give you one example. There are still super toxic agrochemicals out there in the market. The World Health Organization classifies them as Tox 1 chemicals. Some people call them suicide chemicals. And Bayer, a few years ago, led the effort to completely phase out those crop protection products. Unfortunately, they are still in the market. So we got to start with creating a level playing field where those products are no longer the product of choice, and where farmers, no matter how wealthy they are, get access to the latest technology in the space. So that is something we are clearly committed to. It's a journey, like so many journeys, but I think the company has clearly committed to address these kind of challenges.
Good luck on that journey, Matthias. I'm looking forward to seeing that happen over the next few months.
But thank you. Luck I need as well, yeah.
I would, in a second, would briefly also ask the questions what the society in general can do. But before we come to that, if you would be a Matthias consultant, is there anything you would ask Matthias or Bayer in addition? You already started to list up the topics, but what would be your perspective on maybe not only Bayer, but the big corporates in the world should do more in addition what you already said?
Yeah, so I think first of all, for corporations as a whole, obviously we need to move from, in the past, corporations were harming the environment and society often, and they were not accounting for it at all. Now we're moving to a point where corporations are realizing that they have to offset their negative impacts and actually have to start accounting for it slowly but surely. And I hope we can move into a phase where corporations are actually positively contributing to society and the planet. And that's the phase that I really want to see corporations to go into. Because as I said, I'm actually a believer in capitalism. And I believe that businesses are indeed the strongest force that can actually also do something in society and change something in society. Because often global corporations are much more powerful than individual governments. So for example, right now I'm in the Netherlands. This small country with 17 million people probably has less impact on the world than Bayer as a global corporation has. So first of all, really moving from a harming society and the planet to moving towards a world where they actually positively contribute and do not have any negative effects anymore. So that's the first thing that I think we should do. And then I've already talked about how you actually do that then internally through incentivizing management from the top all the way down to actually doing this. Now, if I talk about Bayer specifically, I mean, there are a couple of things that concern me. And one, of course, is particularly dear to my heart is the whole topic of smallholder farmers. And smallholder farmers are usually, for those people who don't know the concept of smallholder farmers, are people that farm on a very small piece of land, like less than 1 hectare often. They usually have around $1 a day to live on. $1 a day, right? That is really not a lot of money. And that's how they make their living, from the hand to the mouth. And so, of course, this is a very vulnerable group of society. It's about probably like 500 million people around the world, or maybe even a little bit more, that actually live in this kind of situation. And for me, this is a group that I'm very passionate about, and that we work with a lot through some of the social businesses that we have in East Africa and India, etc. And so, of course, the business model of Monsanto, but of course also of other seed producers like Syngenta, etc., is to also sell gene-modified seeds to this target group, which I generally don't have problems with generally gene-modified seeds because, of course, they're also particularly resistant against drought, etc. So, like, I don't generally criticize the GMO industry. That's not my problem. But what I really don't like, or what really seems to me as extremely negative from the outside, is that then these farmers use a seed, buy a seed from Bayer or Monsanto, and then in the next season they can't reuse it because it sort of becomes sterile in the second round. Because obviously the business model of Monsanto is driven by wanting to sell a new seed in the next season. And of course, traditionally, that's not how seeds worked. In the next year, you could reuse your seeds from the previous season, and in the next year, you could do it again and again, and thereby grow your wealth and your yield. And that paired obviously with the pesticides, which are bad for biodiversity, that's really what concerns me. And so what I wish, and if I could, let's say, be Matthias in this case and say, this is a target group that we should not do hardcore for-profit business with. This is a target group with whom we should do social business. And so this is a target group which we should support, which we should empower, which we should try for them to make the highest income for themselves, and provide them possibly gene-modified seeds, but that they can reuse in future seasons. And so that would be for me the thing where I would say that 100 million people that you want to reach in your sustainability plan, Matthias, can we not take them out of the standard P&L of Bayer and put them into a separate P&L, which is a social business P&L, where we reinvest our profits into growing their lives rather than making money for our shareholders? That would be a social business for me.
Matthias, go ahead. There's a lot to answer, I would say.
So a lot to answer. So the question whether you separate these topics from your P&L or whether you adjust your P&L so that the business can do this, that people are rewarded for providing access to seeds, for example, is of course one that can decide it one way or the other. But at the core of it, I'm with you. So for example, in the area of access to family planning, we have decided to help closing the gap in terms of access to family planning, which is currently roughly at 200 to 250 million women who would like to have that access but don't get it, even though that's probably the best investment in development that is out there. And what we're going to do here is we invest in additional capacity and we reinvest whatever we contribute to closing that gap into accelerating that journey. Yeah, that's one example where we do it. On the smallholder topic, a big shift since we combined Bayer and Monsanto to the leading business in crop science is that we want to provide free access to seeds. And something people don't know is that Bayer is the largest kind of provider of vegetable seeds. So it's not always about GMO, it could be about a whole variety of seeds. So providing access to seeds for me is key for smallholder farmers. I think that Africa in particular today operates based on seed technology of the 1920s. And since the 1920s, the efficiency of agriculture has massively increased. So that is something very dear to my heart. I'm actually working for 10 years already on the topic, even before I joined Bayer. And I'm really glad to see that our smallholder strategy has a very strong component to provide that access to seeds. Now, in the old days, there were like Terminator seeds that farmers couldn't use anymore in order to really get money from them every year. That was like a big idea of the 1990s. In reality today, one of the reasons why you use seeds only one season is that these are hybrids that are significantly more yield generating than other seeds. And Saskia, for me, the crucial point is not the seed technology. The crucial point is that we create businesses in the low and middle income countries where people really can multiply seeds and provide the best seed technology to the farmers, and then for the farmers to not be economically dependent on those seeds. For me, the seeds are a starting point and not a point where we should seek profits when it comes to smallholders.
Yeah, and maybe to complement that point also, Matthias, and by the way, disclaimer, I'm no agricultural expert, so you have your facts a lot straighter than I have on those agricultural topics. It's just, again, what I can observe from the outside, and that's the voice from which I'm speaking. But I think for me, it's a question of how we're now trying to reach that target group, and that's why I'm coming from the philosophy of saying, can we really carve out a separate unit? Therefore, I'm also saying separate P&L, because otherwise it's very, very hard to track if this is really happening or not, where we really go in it with a very different mindset, where we do not have our normal, original sort of business glasses, profit-making glasses on, but where we really think about, if I was a smallholder farmer and I wanted to create, if I needed best support, what would I actually need as a smallholder farmer? And we from Bayer then, from that perspective, would look at the farmer and say, how can I provide this person with the best support while being able to cover my costs? That's sort of the logic, rather than thinking, how can I provide this guy some seeds while also making a lot of money for myself? And I think that really does fundamentally change the way that I actually problem solve here. And I think that's what I'm proposing, that for this particular target group, for these 500 million people that are really below the poverty line, let's think differently for them, and then focus our, let's say, normal money-making business on other parts. That would be my major proposal. And then there's the other environmental concerns. But again, Matthias, you as a former Green parliamentarian are probably a lot stronger on that side. So I'll leave you to devise a plan to how to ensure there's biodiversity still, and the planet will be able to regenerate itself.
Saskia, as I'm hearing that we're receiving lots of greetings from countries where I would suspect that also smallholders farmers are located. So from Uganda and Zambia and also other countries. Let's stick for a moment with the smallholders. What I would be interested in, and we hear this GMO topic certainly from a lot of NGOs and critics, but there is, at least from our perspective, a very a huge other challenge threatening the business for smallholders farmers, and it's about the pests. Especially this year, we're talking about the locusts. We're talking about the fall armyworm, which is spreading around the global south. And astonishingly, we don't hear so much from NGOs about that. What's your perspective on that? Because at least from our perspective, we can't completely ignore how much these pests are threatening harvests from smallholders.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I mean, we have offices in East Africa, and the locust plague there was a major effect on many of the companies that we've invested into. So we clearly see that that's a major problem. So again, I'm no agricultural expert. I would need to ask our agricultural expert internally at YSB, like, what other alternatives are there? Are there possibly also fertilizers and herbicides that are possibly not negative for the environment, that are more natural? Are there other types of ways to farm, I don't know, permaculture, etc., that actually ensure that they have less of an impact, like these kinds of plagues have less of an impact? I personally do not know that. That is knowledge that is much more in the on your side. And I do fundamentally believe that if Bayer has extremely smart scientists. I mean, it's a company that's built on science over the last 150 years as a German science-driven organization. So I'm pretty sure that if you would make your smart people within the R&D labs, just again think in a different way, think about how can we create a solution that actually ensures that the locust plague is not going to kill all the crops of the smallholder farmers, I'm sure they would come up with a solution, and I'm sure you would have that within a couple of years. So I think it's just a question of, asking the right questions to the people that are actually doing the work, making them be, as you said, incentivized by actually solving the problem rather than only by making money. Because, of course, there's, again, arguments of other NGOs, which, again, I do not know the details, but they're arguing, Bayer is just Monsanto is just reusing old patents that they have instead of coming up with anything new. Again, I cannot say myself if this is true. I'm just hearing this from other people. So I really believe that you have an incredible power within Bayer. You have extremely smart people, incredibly smart engineers. Let them focus on solving the problem rather than just making more money, and you will solve this problem. I'm very sure of that.
Matthias, maybe we stick another second in the developing markets. I know you developed our sustainability strategy, which main pillar is in the developing market, and one of the most ones, not only in the agriculture market but also with regard to health, is education. Because we all agree that in both markets it's extremely helpful and of vital importance to educate farmers, to educate women, especially with regard to contraceptives and so on. What's your strategy behind that here?
First of all, we talk a lot about the lower middle income countries, because when we talk World Overshoot Day, we have to be very conscious of one topic, and that is we might be able to deal with some of the negative impacts like droughts, extreme weather events, heats in a much better way than most people around the world. So the real injustice is that the emissions of the industrialized nations create a huge imbalance in the world, but it's really felt in the poor countries. Yeah? India will be a hotspot of water scarcity. We have huge challenges. We talked about the locust plague, which is also linked to climate change in East Africa. And I'm quite happy that we are helping here not only with crop protection products, but also with training farmers to apply them in a way that ultimately gets us back to a place where they can grow crops. And when it comes to the public health topic, what I found striking was how all of those topics are interconnected. So Bayer has very strong competencies, both from an R&D and from a business perspective, in 3 areas that I believe are key. We talked a lot about the farming side. The second area is micronutrients. There is a micronutrient pandemic nobody talks about. And we have to address that at scale. The problem with these kind of challenges, and it's very similar to what we see with COVID, is the challenges are all known, but they are wreaking havoc at scale because we are not really approaching them as a pandemic, but like with little tiny projects here and there. So how can we help families to improve the overall nutrition? How can we improve the situation with micronutrients? How can we then supplement that with innovative products? And then last but not least, we talked about that family planning. I believe that access to family planning has been mentioned twice as an indicator in the global goals for sustainable development for a very good reason. The access gap to family planning makes it very difficult for women to thrive in the poorest countries of this world. And that's something we have to change. And it's not only about reproductive health, it's about women's health. So what we believe is if we can strengthen health systems to really help women to take care of themselves and their families in a very different way, that would be a breakthrough. And don't get me wrong, this is also about men, but the focus needs to be on women, which, by the way, is also true in the smallholder farming space. The majority of smallholders are women, and that's often forgotten because we are primed with our understanding of what a farm looks like. It's very different in the poorest countries of the world.
And maybe just talking about the focus on women and why that's so important, I can only echo that. Obviously, Mohammed Yunus, with whom I obviously co-founded Yunus Social Business, is known for the whole idea of microcredit, so small loans for poor women in Bangladesh. And he has focused particularly, as you just said, on women. Actually, 99% of the borrowers of the Grameen Bank, which is his microcredit bank in Bangladesh, are women. And why is that? Because women, in the end, apart from the fact that they repay better, they actually invest in the families and make sure that the family actually has education, the right health, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's definitely a very important factor, and it makes a lot of sense to focus on women. And indeed, actually, Bangladesh then as a country, which has had access to microfinance now for over 40 years, the birth rate has gone down significantly.
Thanks, Saskia. Another question to you, because we are still in the midst, or I don't know, maybe at the beginning of this COVID pandemic. I would be very much interested to get how this pandemic is affecting your business. How does it affect your funds that are providing this support for people that need it? Could you elaborate that a bit?
Absolutely. Well, so I think when COVID started hitting in March in Germany, where I'm based, I knew right away that this was going to be something that, as soon as it was going to hit developing countries, it was going to have disastrous effects. Because back then it was still just in China, it just started to come to Europe and the US. And obviously that's exactly what we're seeing happening now. We have a significant caseload now in Brazil, in India, and slowly but surely Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, as also the numbers are creeping up there. So, and obviously you can imagine that social distancing and all of these beautiful strategies that work here do not really work in developing countries where people are much closer together often, where hygiene is not something that people have easy access to. I mean, like hand sanitizer or even clean drinking water is just not available. And obviously the mouth masks, etc., not at all either. So obviously, I'm really, really worried to see how COVID will affect developing countries. It's already affecting them right now. And we see actually in the majority of developing countries that we're not at the peak even of the caseload yet at all. So that's kind of the health side of things. But what we saw directly, pretty much as of day one, as of March already, we saw the economic effect already being extremely strong and in a negative way. So, for example, to give you an example, East Africa, like Kenya and Uganda, where we have offices, they didn't really have pretty much any cases, or like 1 or 2 cases at that point in time. And the government shut down right away, put a very strong lockdown in place because they obviously wanted to prevent the pandemic of entering the country. And they had already some good plans in place from Ebola, etc. And of course, that has led to an incredible economic downturn. And if I look at our portfolio now, about 50% of our portfolio companies have had revenue losses between 50 and 100% in the second quarter of this year. So this is significant. And these are all small and medium-sized companies. We have all seen ourselves probably in our own work and in our own businesses that small and medium-sized companies and also big companies here in Europe are extremely affected. But here we have very good government bailout programs that actually lead to the fact that these companies can continue to exist. In developing countries, that is basically not available or hardly available. And so that's why I really foresee a very, very strong economic downturn that is going to be way worse than anything that we've seen in 2008. And so I'm extremely worried around how COVID is going to affect developing countries and how it's going to plunge another, there are estimates of 500 million people into poverty, another 100 million people into acute hunger. So we have a lot in front of us, and I'm extremely worried about that. I will share maybe one additional thing. So we've then, for our own portfolio companies, have been able to provide furlough payments. So we've basically done what the German government does here in Germany, pay the salaries of the companies that are affected. We've done that ourselves privately for our portfolio companies, and hope that, knock on wood, all of our portfolio companies are going to make it through this crisis. And we've also started the so-called COVID-19 Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs, together with the World Economic Forum and another 50 organizations that are supporting social entrepreneurs all around the world. And this group is basically supporting, I believe, around 40,000 social entrepreneurs around the world that are impacting 1.5 billion people. So this is a significant group, and this group has provided significant funding to their social entrepreneurs and has helped them through this crisis. So that's another thing that we initiated now in April, and that's been going on since then, to make sure that these effects of the pandemic can be evened out for the poorest.
When I hear this and then compare it with the conversations that you have in large businesses, like in our sector, you realize that the difference between people in those big companies and the companies you are dealing with is not their entrepreneurial spirit. The difference is that for your companies, it's about physical survival, whereas for us, it's about kind of quarterly results. And I always get a bit of a shiver when I compare kind of our reality with the reality of the businesses in your portfolio. Mm-hmm. What we have seen is that their companies need to really focus on their supply chains way beyond the aggregators. So we spend more than 20 billion every year for purchasing from other companies in our supply chain. And Thomas Udesen, who leads our procurement, is very passionate about supporting kind of the weaker links of our supply chain, and also the Bayer Foundation, which works also in the social innovation space, has put an effort to support smallholders in that area. Mm-hmm. I believe that the development banks around the world need to pay as much attention to those businesses as they pay to kind of helping the governments in their portfolio to survive. So there is a shift necessary. And I also believe that what the World Economic Forum does is quite significant at the moment. So I always have been like on the fence when it comes to the World Economic Forum, but having seen them focusing on the corona response and sticking to their climate change focused kind of call for building back better is something I find quite inspiring, and I'm glad that you are working with them.
Yeah. And maybe also coming to that larger question of now, how is COVID gonna affect us going forward? I mean, the way that I see it is really, we have an incredible window of opportunity right now, where we can indeed change the way that we're doing things. And I mean, there's all these beautiful hashtags, building back better, etc., like you were mentioning. But I really fundamentally believe that we can use this as an opportunity to change the way we do our businesses. So to give you, one concrete example, which was so eye-opening for me at the beginning of the crisis, literally from one day to another, we were shaking people's hands, and the next day we were doing arm bumps or fist bumps or whatever. And eventually we didn't even start touching each other at all anymore. We started wearing masks. I'm talking Europe, of course, not everywhere in the world, unfortunately. And this has just become something very ingrained in our daily lives. And that happened within literally, I feel, a week or maybe 2 weeks. So we fundamentally, if we have a reason to do things, we can come together as a humanity and from one day to another switch our behavior because we have to. And so for me, I would like to apply that same logic to capitalism as well. We have this external shock now. We've obviously had many external shocks with the environment going completely crazy, as we've been discussing earlier. There are many crises ongoing, from food crisis to, health crisis, I don't know what else. we have that external shock. Let's use this as an opportunity to really fundamentally shift our business in a significant way, because now we can disrupt, we can do something fundamentally different and not just incrementally different. And that's why I was also coming to the point with, for example, I'm really happy to see that you're starting to implement as of 2021, 20% of your management compensation is going to be linked to sustainability. But now is the time to actually be more adventurous and say, let's do at least 50%, because now we have that external shock. Once Corona is behind us and we have a vaccine, I can very well easily see, unfortunately, the world slipping back into the old normal. So we only now have that opportunity, that mindsets are open, people are thinking differently. And so now people like you and of course me, we have the opportunity to really be a little bit more the devil's advocate and say, let's use this opportunity and do something much more disruptive.
One additional question to you, Saskia, because this is certainly a topic we are also discussing a lot in the company. At least from my perspective, I would agree when you're saying this very special situations on a global level comes with lots of opportunities, and especially Bayer has founded a new normal a working group on a global level to discuss how will we work in the future, and we won't return to the old business model. But at the same time, I guess we also should not forget that a global lockdown in this dimension has also a significant negative consequence for millions of people. So I'm always a bit skeptic, saying this is a huge opportunity, and we should do everything like we do currently.
That's not what I'm saying. Yeah.
Millions with people with significant threats and challenges in their personal lives. Yeah.
Of course, and Christian, I fully agree with you. And I mean, obviously, I see that in my work on a daily basis. The issue is people that are daily wage earners. If they cannot go onto the street, they don't make any money, they don't get any food. So I'm just talking for the people that are now in air-conditioned offices, like you and me. We now have the ability to think with our clear heads and think, wow, the world is obviously in a disaster. What can we do about it? So that's what I'm talking about, more us than let's say the average person in a developing country that really is just trying to survive. But it is very important that we use this opportunity to think. And I'm not talking about like we're all going to sit in home office our entire life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm thinking about this time as a time for reflection, to think about how we can change our economy.
Matthias, I would say you mostly share this perspective, right?
I do share this perspective very much, and I think the opportunity we have is to address some of the things that everybody sees now. So access to health, for example, half of the world doesn't have the access to health that we take for granted. And even where we take it for granted, we see the weaknesses in the healthcare systems. I live in the United States. When you look at the people that die as a result of COVID contraction, it's awful. You clearly see how imbalanced many of the health systems in the rich part of the world are. And when you then add to it that there is half of the world's population that doesn't even have a fraction of that in their lives, I hope that we really kind of take a different view. And for me, the question of access to vaccination is going to be one of those proof points. Yeah, how to get vaccines to 5 billion people is something that has not been done in that short of time at that scale ever before. It requires this combination of ingenuity, of science, with a very strong commitment to humanity and not just to making money. And that's currently happening. We see like more and more trends like that. And I hope that we can build on that. I just want to share one example that is not linked to the pandemic. It's this ongoing challenge to find the next generation of antibiotics to avoid antimicrobial resistance in people. And the pharmaceutical industry finally came together, even though it's not the focus of their business, to pool money to really invest in research and development of this next generation. I believe decisions like that wouldn't have been possible without the wake-up call of the global pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think what you just also mentioned with the vaccine, I mean, that's also been some work that we've been involved in over the last couple of months. So we created, or Yunus created, a petition called Corona Vaccine, a Common Good, or COVID Vaccine, a Common Good, for that same reason again, that obviously we're again thinking in silos. We're thinking, oh, the US needs to get the vaccine first, Germany needs to get the vaccine first. But in the end, this is a pandemic, so it's everywhere in the world. And if we just get our funny little cute islands clean of COVID, that's not going to help us. We need the entire world to be vaccinated, because otherwise this pandemic can come back over and over again. So even in the enlightened self-interest of Western countries, it should be something that we right away try and distribute all around the world. And not something we keep for ourselves, like the US has been proposing.
Very quick comment to our audience. We're receiving lots of comments and also agreement from attendees around the world. But nevertheless, I would invite you to also ask your question, given the fact that there are only a couple of minutes left. If there are any questions from your side to Matthias or to Saskia, please let me know. I can see it on the second screen here, and I would then ask them. Before we hopefully get the questions, a question to you both that bother me for quite a while. Saskia and Matthias, Fridays for Future raised the issue of the climate change a lot around the world. Everybody knows that this is a tremendous challenge for all of us. Nevertheless, we don't see significant movement or improvements because, at least from my perspective, the goal to improve our personal lives is deep in our roots as a human being. Improvement of personal life often comes with bigger cars, flying more frequently, eating meat, and so on. So, Saskia, you working with lots of NGOs, what is your perspective? Do you have an answer? How, which way would you recommend for the society to tackle this tremendous challenge?
Yeah, well, I think that there's obviously sort of the industrial CO2 emissions, and then there are also the personal CO2 emissions, which are significantly lower. And then there's obviously a significant CO2 emissions coming out of agriculture. So I think that there is a variety of different measures that we should take, and I should probably defer to Matthias on this one. But I think, given that obviously this is much more your expertise than mine, but I think that obviously we do have to fundamentally change the way that industry works. We have to fundamentally change agriculture so it has more sustainable ways of working, less CO2 emissions. And of course, every individual can do something, no doubt. But actually the significant amounts of CO2 are really coming from industry and agriculture at this stage. So I think that's where we have the largest lever to really make a difference. That said, nobody should then lean back and say, okay, I'm going to relax and I'm going to eat all the meat and I'm going to fly around the world as much as possible. But of course, the big lever is with industry and agriculture.
Yeah, Christian, from my end, apart from raising the attention, what I like most about the achievements of Fridays for Future is their relentless focus on science. I think what they have done really well is focusing on the data, and the data indicates how significant climate change is affecting our lives and the lives of our children. And I believe this relentless focus on science needs not only be applied for the diagnosis of the problem, but also for us finding the solutions. I really enjoy some of the conversations about investment in new technology that would help us to really kind of adjust to some of the challenges of climate change. And of course, in the field of agriculture, that's a big topic. So there is a bio-revolution going on where we can do a lot to improve the way we do agriculture and reduce the environmental impact of agriculture, perhaps even to a point that agriculture turns from a sector that contributes to climate change, about a quarter of all emissions are linked to this sector, to become carbon neutral or even carbon positive. I think if we relentlessly focus on science on the solution side, if we have a science-based U-turn in agriculture, we will get to a very different place. Now, when it comes to our own habits, I'm now a practitioner of carbon neutral jet lag. It's totally possible to do my job with less flights. And this year is the first year, I think, since I'm 22 or 23 years old, that I have more bike miles than air miles in my personal kind of footprint. And we have to change some of that, even though it's bad news for those people who live in the transportation or hospitality or live from the transportation and hospitality industry. But I think you will see a reduction of flights even after the pandemic. I think you will see new ways of working. And it's not only about working from home or working in the office. I also believe that we will be much closer to the countries we talked about a lot right now. So in my personal experience, what the changes of this year brought was that I feel much closer to people who work in Africa or in Southeast Asia or in Central America, because the barrier of traveling is no longer the key barrier to collaboration. And I see that as something positive we should cherish. When you look at the Earth Overshoot Day, it's pretty clear that food systems need to change. To go back to the December state, Saskia, you talked about at the beginning of this conversation, we have to stop deforestation and replant forests at a really large scale. We have to attack food waste, and that starts on the field. 40% of all agricultural products gets lost on the field. That's often forgotten. Let's not only look at the supermarket kind of bins. Let's look at what's happening on the field, and let's protect crops, which is a crucial element of that. And we have to decarbonize industries. And whether we achieve decarbonization without deindustrialization is one of the biggest challenges for the economies in the US, in Europe, in China. And it's a precondition for countries like Bangladesh, but also India and others to get their fair share of global growth and to have a much different living for many people who currently live in poverty. So it's a lot connected here, as you can see. But I have to say, from what I've seen this year, despite all the setbacks we have, my optimism grew quite a bit, and I think a lot is possible. But we also know one thing. The success we had this year in pushing the date of World Overshoot Day from July to August is a success that many people pay with despair, with their lives, and also with falling back into extreme poverty. So that can't be the solution. We can't just stop can't just stop economies to achieve that goal. We have to innovate like there is no other planet.
Saskia, only 2 minutes being left. Here comes the key question, and it comes from someone from our audience because I learned from your LinkedIn account that Bayer is on more or less on your personal blacklist of companies not collaborate with. And I promise I didn't organize this question in advance, but Gabi Borian asks, how can these two very complementary organizations come together and help the advancement of new solutions and business models? So I guess the prerequisite would be to put our off of your blacklist, I guess.
Yeah, Christian. Yeah, indeed. I mean, and I think we were discussing some of the points. How would I see that you're getting off of our blacklist? We discussed some of the points already in previous questions, i.e. stop any harmful products for the planet, really take them off of your product list. I really fundamentally think that is possible, and invest in the science of actually replacement products that will that you could then in the end bring to market. I also believe that the logic of really thinking in a social business way for the target group of the smallholder farmers would be something. And then fundamentally, I think, Matthias, you should be on the board level. I mean, you're a nice SVP, but we need people that think in a more radical way at the board level. And I saw that Werner Baumann is now, since January, next to being CEO, which I thought was a full-time job, now also the Chief Sustainability Officer, which is sort of nice from a PR perspective, because then you can argue it's at the top level, but I don't really think he's going to have a lot of time to work on that topic. So I think, Matthias, you should move into the board and then really push from the top that changes are happening. And I think that's one of the things also that we would need to see, that there's a fundamental strategy that's going to change the company, that there's real top level buy-in for change, and then we would also be more than happy to work with you, and I think that's a fundamental thing that I would like to also share. I know that Monsanto particularly and Bayer now together with it are looked at as the bad guys, and also for good reasons. We've talked about a couple of the examples. But also I'm a pragmatist, and if I want to change the world, then we also need to get the bad guys to fundamentally change. We can probably have a lot more change when we get the bad guys to change than to just incrementally improve the good guys. So from that perspective, if there indeed was a very clear top level buy-in, if there was clearly a strategy that is also going to be checked by external accountants, etc., in place to actually change the way that Bayer works and Monsanto work, then we would also be more than happy to experiment with additional things to bring you even further into that dimension that I talked about, i.e. a company that improves the world rather than a company that just even harms it or offsets the negative harm.
Matthias, last slot from your side. Latest or last opportunity to tell, as the bad guy, representing the bad guys, to tell Saskia how we probably could get off her blacklist. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I always do is I look pretty serious when I listen to people, so I always look like a bad guy, that's for sure.
Now, it's the beard also. It's the beard, Matthias.
Let me say two things. So the first thing on this question of board of management, look, we have currently a board of management that is comprised solely of men, and the next members of Bayer's board of management need to be women. Yeah, so full stop. So irrespective of the topic of sustainability or me as a person. And I personally like not to be in those roles, because I can do much more in the role I'm in right now, because I can really focus on driving this transformation. So I don't like hierarchies. I don't like organizations focused on position power, and I'm really glad to see that in the case of Bayer that's not necessary. I'm also happy to see how much time Werner, my boss, actually spends on the topic. Yeah, so that's probably one thing that people don't know about him, but when he focuses on something, he focuses on it. Yeah. So, and that's the journey we are currently undertaking. So I don't need to be sitting in a very comfortable chair to do what I'm doing. I need to have the time to do what I'm doing. And then secondly, let's take the question whether we could work together offline. I can see a lot of overlap from the Bayer Foundation that works on social innovation to our procurement, to the focus on the smallholder communities, where, Saskia, we also need to learn from organizations like yours. So if you build a business over 150 years and you focus very much on the richer parts of the world, you don't have the same knowledge about the countries we are talking about here, and we need to learn. I personally, having worked closely with cocoa farmers for many, many years, always realize how much I need to learn. And there is this nice Mark Twain quote that I really like, and that is, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, but what you know that ain't so. Yeah, and we have to really better understand that reality, and that is something where we also as a company can learn from companies and organizations like yours.
Okay, thank you both. It's not so much relevant if I think that this was an interesting exchange. I do so, but obviously also our audience agrees with that. We had over 5,000 people joining this this call. We have over 600 comments, and unfortunately, many not answered questions. So my list is still long. Maybe we should consider to put another chapter in a couple of weeks on that. Thanks so much for joining us today. This applies certainly for the two panelists, but also for all the people joining out there in the world, wherever you are. Thanks a lot for listening and attending this format. I'm totally sure. Have a nice rest of the day wherever you are. Have a nice spend the Earth Overshoot Day with considering what we ourselves can do to push it back. Thanks again to Saskia and Matthias. Saskia, lots of luck for your business in the pandemic. And yeah, have a nice day. Take care and goodbye.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Christian.
And good luck.